Very DIY organization. Hi everybody, and welcome to 192 Books. To those of you who are in person and those of you joining us on the live stream, I'm Terrence Orjune, the manager of 192 Books, and I present this event with the assistance and collaboration of my colleagues Lisa Knowlton and Victoria Nabolson, and with the assistance of Xavier Danto and Stephen Spratt at Paula Cooper Gallery, who are not here tonight. And thank you to Ben Estes and Alan, the editors of Song Cave, for publishing this book. It is a pleasure to welcome Alice Notley, who I'm blocking from view. Here to discuss her new collection of essays, Telling the Truth as It Comes to You. Selected essays. Huh? Oh, to us!
Up.
Oh, up!
The truth as it comes up.
I'm loving this. Telling the truth as it comes up. Selected essays and talks 1991 to 2018. In it, there are essays about William Carlos Williams, Homer, Edmund Demby, and everything and everything. Alice Notley was born in Bisbee, Arizona on November 8, 1945, and grew up in Needles, California, in the Mojave Desert. She's educated in the Needles Public Schools at Barnes College and the Writers Workshop, University of Iowa, receiving an MFA in fiction and poetry from the latter. I'm going to skip a little bit. Notley is the author of more than 40 books of poetry, including At Ninth Estate, a double volume Closer to Me and Closer to Language of Heaven, and Decimere and How Spring Comes. Her epic poem, The Descent of the Let, was published by Penguin, followed by Mysteries of Small Houses. In 2005, she won the Griffith International Prize for, I just got lost. For Disobedience, I know. She has edited the collected poems of Ted Berrigan with Anselm and Eddie Berrigan, and also Get the Money. Her most recent books are early works, the Speak Angels series and For the Ride, which we have here. Her interlocutor is Leanne Brown, a poet and a singer of neo hymns and ballads. Her books include Polyverse, In the Laurel's Cot, and The 13th Sunday in Ordinary Time. Brown was born in Japan in 1963 and was raised in Charlotte, North Carolina. She attended Brown University for both graduate and undergraduate degrees, and she lives and works at Torn Page for Tony Torn. Okay. There's more. Alice's first book of criticism, Coming After, was a major watershed moment for me. She wrote about Ron Padgett, Joan Kiger, and the feminine epic, and here with this new collection reminds me of the epigraph to her first one, that what she is doing, and we all are doing, what the poet's job is moving past the fear of life's paucity. Before I hand it over, a few words about the event. It's being live streamed and it'll be online at PCG Studio. Alice is going to read for 30 minutes and Leanne's going to ask questions with a Q&A and a signing after. I'll hand it over to Alice.
Thanks.
I'm going to stand up for this part, if I can continue to stand up. I had no idea how to do this, so I decided to, by chance, find certain pages in here and then read the pages I found by chance, and with the rule that I had to make a little excerpt out of whatever pages I opened to. So this is all somewhat random. So the first pages I opened to come from an essay, a talk I gave in. I have to find it. It's a talk I gave at Temple University in 2001 called Instability in Poetry. And so I'm going to go back to the page, just a few sentences before the page, because that was in the rule that I could do that. Okay, Anselm and my son Anselm suggested actually the topic. So I've been talking about him and the suggestion of the topic. And then everything is in the discovery and the sense that one is getting somewhere. And unlike some poets, I believe I am getting somewhere. I don't think I am constantly creating meaning. I think I am on a quest and am achieving it. I think I have suffered along the way from being on the quest and from what has happened to me by accident or from fate and from being a woman. I certainly haven't suffered more than many others. When someone close to me dies, I am drawn to the darkness of the world's genocides, wondering how people can endure so much and survive when they do. A commonplace thought process. But we are constantly creating these scenarios of many deaths by our limited and local perceptions of the world, our delusion that we need so much and need to make a much more visible human world structure, our inability to contact consciously the crystal city, the city of my poems, our inability to know our interconnectedness and our literal creation of what is. If my work is a quest, my knowledge has been and is being accumulated gradually in time, though I sometimes know it all at once, past and future, that is when I am consciously in that city. But I have been several selves or styles, and I still am all of them, or any of them when I wish. Recently, I thought of myself as being empty from loss and full, since there's so much room of only consciousness, pure self, but I can use a self or an old self whenever I want to, as I do throughout Mysteries of Small Houses, which is written in many styles. I think I'm supposed to be making jokes now to lighten the gravity and possible pretentiousness, as if I could care, of what I'm saying, and I could do that if I wanted to out of the style I used in the 70s, which I am very fond of, and which allowed much instability, but of a slightly different kind. It wanted to find out what people were actually saying now, and not 10 years ago. What said and how said. Therefore, it let in the said while it was being said, and hoped an artful shade would be present too, but it fought against the tendency of poetry to speak in just previous manners or vocabularies, the ones older poets had made a success in. A slightly earlier style, whose discoveries flowed into that style, wanted to find strength in what was and is my personal instability, a frequent shakiness, which opens me up by first nearly breaking me. My sons, and probably you yourselves as poets, will recognize this instability. We aren't supposed to talk about it. Current academicians might call us something like poets of the self. If we do, then our parents still will ask us to talk to the psychiatrist in the family. I am reminded of my sons, the poet Edmund Berrigan's invention of a movement called crackademics. It pretends to come from Harvard, and its pronouncements are made in an accent only Edmund can achieve. Try saying poets of the self to the very top of the nose, and you might get it. Poets of the self. Poets of the self. The Crackademics movement has produced 3 volumes of the magazine Crackademics, plus 2 poetry anthologies, all of which exist in one photocopiable copy each. It is a very simple movement, since the cavity itself is one's or Edmund's mind. But back to my matter. Apparently, I was wrong about the founding of the movement. It also involved Anselm and Willie Yakulik and some other people who are much more adept at the accent than I am. This excerpt that I picked at random is from a talk I gave on the Iliad and postmodern war at Poets House here in December 2002. And it begins with a quote. This excerpt begins with a quote. I loved Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld's briefings during the Afghanistan war. They were no-nonsense tough with a dose of American nationalism that resonated with me. Columnist Thomas L. Friedman, October 3rd, 2002, in the IHT, International Herald Tribune. And elsewhere in paper, a photo of Bush flanked by 9 male heads. 9 male heads! After the House approved the language of a resolution authorizing use of military force against Iraq. Where did the sick mind of war come from? Is there a myth of the first war? No one disapproves on principle of the mass killing of others of other nations. The Iliad is a sick book. The war against terrorism is our own sick poem. We will never have to read it, having gone far beyond reading. The Iliad is not redeemed by its sound and form, which I love, just barely preceding it. The United States is trying to tell itself a story, and everyone wants to be in it, to be defended, to be frightened, to be vindicated, above all to hate. But we will win. Our poem is and will remain in English, as the Iliad is in Greek, the language of the victors. We must never lose again, as we did in Vietnam, and as the noble Trojans did. For in the Iliad, we are invited to admire both Hector and Achilles, and possibly Hector more than Achilles. This means that if you lose, you could still win. From White Phosphorus. Homeric, he said it was hideous, all of it hideous. Every instant in Nam, theater of worsts, now mantle of white, phosphorus and lilies, trees now lean down over our faces, tell details of battle, as in an epic, as in lies. From Book 13, Lysander struck Menelaus on the ridge of his helmet with crest of horsehair on the topmost part beneath the very plume. But Menelaus struck him as it came up against him on the forehead above the base of the nose, and the bones snapped loudly, and his eyeballs, all bloody, fell in front of his feet in the dust, and he doubled up and fell. Newsweek, October 7th. At the same time, regular soldiers like those of the 82nd were, until August, mostly confined to their bases, just itching to get out and do the job for which they were trained. They were trained to advance, to contact and kill the enemy. In the village of Marzak, several witnesses say that 82nd troops chased down a mentally ill man, pushed him to the ground, handcuffed him, and they took turns taking photos of themselves, pointing a gun to his head. Later in the article, why do the Americans come here and search our women? It is all the same war from forever. It is not the same soldier or the same woman. This excerpt is from a talk I gave at Europa, I think, at first. It's called Noir Talk, and it's about all the noir books and mysteries I read while I was doing the hepatitis C treatment in 2003 and 4, 2003 mostly. So here in the passage I opened to, I'm talking about a book of the French novelist Fred Vargas. This book is, she's the author of a number of really terrific books. So it's in another of Vargas's books, Dans le Milieu, there's an old man who makes table-high wooden statues of women. My translation. Tens of small women in wood, nude, in posture seated, kneeling, thinking, or vaguely imploring, minutely detailed and realistic. They were not, frankly speaking, works of art. They were small women, very well made, much too weak and prostrate for Mark's taste. You only make women? Asked Mark. Because something else exists? What else? Repeated the old man, forever scratching his torso. Boats, churches, trees, fruit, cloth, clouds, deer and woods. That's women, all of that. In any case, you would not say the contrary if you were just a little smarter. Symbols bore me. It's better to make women straight away. The old man is actually sculpting women who were victims of crimes. His son-in-law, Merlin, is the book's serial killer. excerpt from The Black Trailer, a short story poem by myself. You enter the lives of people who don't exist. You want some of them to die in the course of the story. The face is blown away, the fingerprints are decaying. But first two people become lovers. I now watch them make love. He is both a man and a literary character. In her own words, she keeps her artist space, though she's fictional too. Enclosed in the circle, I watch her with sadness. Will I never be that person again? My fingerprints are almost gone from that scene. It's a beautiful hit if your identity is the story. Are you identifying with death in anticipation because death's you? But it isn't necessarily me, I say, so I may look for you later. I will confront you somewhere where you aren't in order, I say to you. She is Catherine, a martyr who never lived. They will have no evidence of her existence. She will be robbed of her sanctity. They won't be alive at the same time as she, trembling, crumbling, lightning. I don't know if it's lightning or lightening. His name is Mark. It will stay in place, for that really is the past, when I was broken, when only a mark would do fine. I said, I like this play. You said, it's no good. You played the corpse on stage, and it became good. Was it mine? If I am, say, the ocean, the earth, whatever dies for you? I will search for you after your death to confront you. I will pose to you your timelessness and lack of fixity. I will say you have now never won. I will search for you across heaven, for you marked me when I was indistinct, when I was loving, I say, when the drama still had its humor and the ocean was unjudged by you, before you thought it worth destroying, like the sky, the earth, in what order named those three spiraling. When I didn't have to be either a woman or a bird, when the bloody wheel wasn't tattooed into decayed flesh, when we didn't love the murder. I will search for you across life to undo the murder. How can I let go, I say, just because there's no time now? The opening sentence of the entry for elegy in the Princeton Encyclopedia of Poetry and Poetics are as follows, the opening sentences. Elegy, from Greek elegeia, lament, a lyric, usually formal in tone and diction, suggested either by the death of an actual person or by the poet's contemplation of the tragic aspects of life. In either case, the emotion, originally expressed as a lament, finds consolation in the contemplation of some permanent principle. I'm not sure that last sentence is true, unless permanent principle may be expanded to include the notion of form itself. It is the form of the elegy and the emotion invested in it that give release and consolation to the reader. The detective novel is a form that is in one aspect an elegy. The genre provides an emotional expanse for grief and anger, and it doesn't seem to matter what the reader's politics, class, profession are, the form works emotionally. The question is whether another form does this adequately at this time. I couldn't get what I needed elsewhere, except in the act of writing my own poems, and there was something in a handful of Dylan songs, and in some blues songs and folk songs also. I began to pay attention to opera again. People would say to me, why don't you read something better? Why are you reading such depressing, bloody books? Well, I needed to read these, though I certainly welcomed the better written of them. I believe there has been a murder. I believe the murder must be undone, as I say above in the Black Trailer. I see that living requires me to face the fact of the murder over and over. This is what I know, and this is a knowledge I share with crime fiction. Perhaps contemporary poetry has become too reticent for my taste. This may be too long, all of this. Try water. Okay, this is from an essay on Edward Slinger, Gunslinger, written in 2007. And in this excerpt, Effie Mahamolis is interviewing him, and she asks him a question, and he says, of Slinger. I just let it be its own thread and what people are saying to each other, the kind of sort of vague, abstract, sort of irrepressible mindlessness at times, and the vocabulary that generates all that were natural to the time. That's what I was hearing around me. When I look at the poem now, I don't see it as anything but an empiricism of the language that I was hearing at the time. I take this as Ed letting us know we can have the poem at face value as its language. Our delight in it, the fact of it, is what it sounds like, it says, though the compressed reading knowledge therein be so considerable. Despite the erudition, the poem's obvious, and it's for us. Ed goes on to say of the quality of the obvious, because except for things that are extremely esoteric that only a few scientists know about, everything is obvious. So if we couldn't constantly claim a new connection for the obvious, we'd be in bad trouble real quick. In the interview, Effie asks Ed whether Slinger is really a narrative poem. A good question and probably not answerable. Though Ed answers, sure, maybe that's a bit gratuitous, I suppose. It tells a story. It's not much of a story. It's a finished excuse. Effie's own argument against the poem's categorization as narrative is its extreme concision and the discreteness of its sections. Ed obviously thought he was writing a narrative poem while he was writing it. One thinks like that while writing, but maybe that isn't strictly what he did. The spaces between the sections are an important aspect of the poem, time caused. As I said before, if you look at the poem without being conditioned, I am, to think of it as narration, what you might see is a collection of incredible pieces which add up to something quite different from a story, more like the Wasteland than the Iliad. Ed calls The Wasteland the great poem of the 20th century in his interview with John Wright, a judgment only very obtuse people would argue with. The Wasteland created 20th century poetry. Maybe he was unconsciously emulated it. Many people of his generation must have been in order to get past it. Ed also evokes Kerouac's On the Road in the interview with Effie and addresses Jack, quote unquote, in Slinger, Jack being one of those ineffable sliding words, names. Get out of my way, Jack, that won't stay fixed, but was carved in granite. Certainly Slinger feels like a period of the mid-60s, the mid-70s, when one was always in a vehicle, in an unfixed life, high and talking to some others, shooting out bullets. The line, bullets are not necessarily specific, maybe more in the poem than the oft-quoted speed is not necessarily fast. Okay, this is from, can I go on? Can I just sort of go on? Yeah. Okay. Right, Ansel just got here. Ansel, you have a seat.
I like it here.
Don't be like that.
Oh, I'm like that.
This is from, I gave it at an event in Tulsa. It was a conference event, the Tulsa School, the second generation of poets, and I talked about this moment concerning Ted Berrigan, Ron Padgett, Dick Gallup, and Joe Brainerd. This moment when they stopped being not so good and suddenly became terrific. So the essay talk is called Breaking Through an Homage. And this is, so I opened the book accidentally to this page, and these few pages are about Joe. And now to quote from Joe. I want to excerpt from Joe's Secret Journals, 1961, written in New York when he was 19, but can't figure out how to do it. It's too embarrassing a word, and that it's supposed to be. So I'm going to pick a single page at random, like a tarot card, and deal with it. So I was doing that. Beethoven's Seventh Symphony, people who know what they know and want to know more. People who appreciate the shape, purity of an egg, plus its organic satisfaction. People who love red dance to Elvis Presley, offer you a cigarette, listen for hours to Don Giovanni. People who need you, who play in the snow and are excited by the sensation of their frozen toes, hands, and ears. People who, like myself, like long hair or just feel they must let it grow absurdly for the sake of being absurd. People who realize the actual value of a rectangle with a sterile portrait of George Washington and all kinds of frills, a detailed ornament, so it will be hard to counterfeit. People who know it's a piece of paper, and if they hurry, some fool will give them a book, a tube of oil paint, great food, or a taxi cab in exchange. But we are the ones that don't really labor away time and energy for our money. We sell blood occasionally, borrow here and there, paint signs on some guy's truck, which logic tells us is okay, but that we know is, if nothing else, is a symbol of decline and defeat, and that we must keep up the phony guard until it's no longer phony. We sponge off friends who know why you are sponging and understand, and even some that don't and are resentful. We are taken, but we also know the value. We are takers, but we also know the value of giving. We work in antique shops at night where we can read, especially when we unfortunately no longer have electricity, because old George came in two-handed to trade for Spencer's The Fairy Queen in 2 volumes bound in dirty dark blue with plain faded gold lettering giving the general effect. ... Well, I got off easy. No references to beating off pills, the selfishness of women, Joe's tears, or the flaw of homosexuality. Joe has not yet come out. One is struck by the fact that Joe was on top of the list form way predating I remember. The People Who passage begins on the previous page and is lengthy, and also on top of the sharp verbal image and sensation. The passage doesn't feel like Joe's breakthrough art that would soon appear, the assemblages, except maybe in its considerable lavishness and effusion. Nowhere in this particular excerpt are the large number of phrases that Ted stole from the journal for the sonnets, as he likewise stole from Dick. Nor on this page appears the sentence underlined by Ted in my manuscript copy. Ted's the only person that I think has learned something from me and used me. A bit later, I don't know when, Joe and Dick collaborate with input from Ted. Why do I possess this slightly unsuccessful, playful, slightly worn collaboration? Joe begins, I would say, with the blue rectangular solids heaped in the middle like logs on scarlet red fire, and there are erupting firecracker-like or rocket-like shapes too, but the blue things are labeled by Joe green beans. Lacking chaos there, blue pen scribbles, and Dick has printed diagonally in the same space 2 sensation-seeking hipsters and their jet-propelled search for segues into green beans. Below, Dick writes, Joe could fix this one. Then, okay. Then Ted writes in black, the end. Along the far left border is written, I think by Dick, an RKO Albee picture. Albee as in Edward Albee. Below is a photo of minor teen idol Bobby V with cutout black cardboard rectangles Xing out his mouth. The photo contains the reproduced signature in not Bobby V's Palmer method script, Bobby V. Below the photo, Dick has printed Guillaume Apollinaire. And finally, to the right, in the remaining white space, Ted has put one of the year's 10 best, time. Well, they couldn't get it to be serious enough. I guess that's why I have it still. I really like it. It has a fine, happy spirit and contains Ted's idiosyncratic handwriting and Dick's spontaneous slanted printing and the block letters of Joe, those personality traces, soul traces, now obliterated by the computer. Is that why we value the collaboration so much? The presence of the naked several hand. Okay, I'm going to read just this one more. Yeah, and then there will be a half hour. Okay. This is from a talk I gave at Poet's House called, I think, on the poetry talent. Once when I was a little girl, I told my mother I had an excruciating headache. I was 4 or 5 years old. I had no headache, but I wanted to say excruciating. She burst out laughing and said, "No, you don't." It was embarrassing, but I got to say the word. There are always words in my head waiting to be said like that, if I can relax enough and not think about what I'm supposed to say in a poem. It's all made out of words. Sometimes I believe that, and sometimes I don't. A poem is made out of words, is it? Words are made out of me and you. Nothing is made out of anything. Nothing is made out of. Words are electric and change shape as you say them, and the world changes shape as you speak. That's more like it. I am changing you. I am causing you or me. I am changing us. I am making us transform, come to new life. Forget the old stuff so hurtful. If this poem hurts you, you will still have some distance from it. Even I will, even if it appears to shatter me, because it's more material than my feelings are that can be nightmarish, that is, unreal. This poem is more real. Do I believe that? Yes, that's why I'm a poet. There are certain things I should never have to go through again. Some aspects of experience are unbearable. Poetry can change them. The novel can't, it's too sentimental. Music can't, it's too sentimental. What about painting? I find it abused because it's so hard. Poetry can be hard because the words of it are hard. They stay there, though you're always almost distorting them with your voice. I still haven't explained it, though. Whenever I say a line of poetry, it gets explained. Her love is only itself. Each poet is only a human girl who must die. When a snake was our mother, when a snake was betrayed. Hang me up by the old corral, hang me up by the old church wall, and I'll never go home again, and I'll never go home again. That's a song I dreamed, and it came with the tune. Sing. Hang me up by the old corral, hang me up by the old church wall, and I'll never go home again, and I'll never go home again. As did the following lines I dreamed come with a tune. You blue bonnets in the no, that's not right. You blue bonnets in the underworld, bonnets in the overworld. You blue bonnets, you blue bonnets, bonnets in the underworld. Also, do I rise, baby, just as long as I rise? Do I sing, baby, just as long as I sing? Do I write, baby, just as long as I write? That is, those are 3 little songs I dreamed whole with their tunes. The first 2, particularly the first, work without the tunes. The third doesn't seem to exist apart from it, and I can't say it without seeking it. But I dreamed them. I wrote them in my sleep 10 to 12 years ago. I am incapable of forgetting their tunes. I have never written a musical tune away. I wrote the following poem when I was 31, when I was alive. When I was alive, I wore a thin dress, bare shoulders, the heat of the white sun, and my black thin dress did envelop me till I was a shell, gladly and breeze, ruffled and filled against good lakes, the translucent fabric in my heart transparent as I walk towards Nereids and Helenas, as my skirt fills, empties, and fills with cooling air. This poem has a poetry tune. It has a stanza shape, a traditional one, which is a superficial part of the tune, but the real tune just rises up from the words as I read it. I think it was an imitation of a poem by William Carlos Williams, but it is so much itself now that I can't remember anything about how I wrote it. No one else but me could have written it. Repeat that. No one else but me could have written it. It is sentimental because I wanted it to be, but it is more than that. It is a unique life form. It is also true. It is about being on the way, not being there. And that's why it's more than sentimental. but it's more than sentimental because it's words completely. It refers to no other life form, even though it's an imitation. If you talk about consonants and vowels or intonation patterns or even word choices, you won't get it why it works. I can remember walking to Marion's and Helena's on that day in 1977. Did I make the world over in some way by writing this poem?
Well, I've known you for over 35 years. I'm always still starstruck. We're friends for a long time. But I want to thank you for that reading. And that last passage was brought forward truth. And that's in the title. So I wanted to talk about the title of the book, Telling the Truth as It Comes Up. And of course, I can't help but hear Emily Dickinson, tell the truth, but tell it slant.
Yeah.
And I hear, but I think of you as sort of channeling as you write it. Like, what kind of book is this besides a talks and essays book? Is it other things besides talks and essays? Like,
Everything, well, it all hangs together.
Yeah.
But it covers about 25 years. And it's not everything I wrote in that form, in those forms in those 25 years. So I selected them because they hung together, and certain kinds of interests and things keep coming up. But a lot of them don't have me in them, and somehow I got some of those ones when I went through this process of picking them by accident, by random. I don't know. Each one of them comes to a certain point. Each of the excerpts comes to a certain point, and that's a truth point. Each one of them had a little core or a little ending and I didn't go for that. But then when I got the 2-page thing, then I tried to make it have a form because I was going to read it. And each one of them had an ending, and the ending was kind of a truth place. But you have to keep talking till you get to the place. That's how you get to know what the truth is. And it has to have a lot of words around it. It can't just be some bald thing.
That's the channeling thing I was thinking of, like sort of that. I felt
Yeah, but I'm just enjoying myself. I'm not channeling.
I mean,
It's talking to whoever wants to talk. Even if it's some dead person. Talking.
there's this great quote in the very last essay, The No Poetics, or the woman who counted cross ties, that seems to speak to this. The important thing about poetry and poetics is never to confuse the two. Poetry is ruthless, immoral, self-sufficient, and potentially destructive or revolutionary, and poetics isn't. It's moral and often self-serving. It justifies, it creates value. I am immorally and ruthlessly a poet. I serve my talent. I have suffered and been chastised. So, I just love that. I mean, but these seem like I feel like that this is a book of poetics, but it's also a poem.
Yeah,
Like it's like
yeah.
you're poeting, like you're being a poet doing the essay. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I every time I wrote one of them, I went through a process like that, to write it, because otherwise I would be very bored.
Right.
So, I mean, you have to, anytime you write something, you have to want to do it. And when you want to do it, you kind of have to surprise yourself. And so each one of them had a different task. There was a different thing I had to do. I had to think of something to say about Ed Miller. And there's a lot to say about Ed Miller, but most people already knew what it was, and I had to think of the things I knew about Ed, and I knew Ed. And somehow the fact that I knew him helped me say things about him. I knew everything. I knew the woman who interviewed him, and we had followed him sort of in jobs, tended to have jobs that he had, and I just had a sense for who he was, and I wanted to talk about how much I liked him, and the essay just come to this place where I'm just sort of high on talking about it. I really enjoy coming to that point, and that's a truth point.
Great. Oh yeah, I love how it has the anecdotal and sort of memoir stuff that goes into this poetics. And it's funny, but preparing my questions, I also just did some bibliomantic pointing,
Right.
and I came up with there's just I kept finding things about dream, and I love how dream is throughout all your work, and how it just, as I did every essay, there's something about dreaming, and about this is a quote I just pulled out: "Is dream something godlike inside you? One splits so easily into dialogue with it." And it made me think of that mask on the cover, and that what you're saying about selves, and about what the uses of dream. Could you talk more about your relation to the uses of dream in your poetry?
Well, I paid attention to my dreams from when I was very young. I don't know why exactly. I had a sense that they were important and magical. And then I found out that writers kept track of their dreams. And so I realized I could do that. I use them for all sorts of things. I'm not using them right now, but I like to think about what dream means and what it is. And I'm most interested in the moment in the fact that there's no time in dreams and that there's no transition. And so I think that probably the ideal time is the timelessness that like in dreams. Dreams are all jump cuts. You have this, and then you don't have, and then you have this, and you don't have to get there. You never have to get anywhere unless the only thing you're doing is transitioning. Then just that's the whole dream. But I mean, it just presents you with these scenes as images, and right now that's really interesting to me. I don't have to get anywhere.
That reminds me of how I love how you put all the ballads and songs and how those influence your work, and how a ballad is sort of leaping and lingering in a cinematic way. There's no transition between.
Yeah, but that's why I like narrative poetry as opposed to the novel. But a lot of people like the novel because they like transition. You know, they like description, they like exposition, they like getting there. But I don't like it. I like sort of taking everything to be as precise as possible. What it is in a poem.
It's concise and concentrated, but it's also, you have these long lines. That's why it's so interesting that you, in the musical section, you're talking about Dylan.
Yeah.
You're talking about, and it's funny that he's playing right now,
Right.
and he's playing tomorrow night too,
Yes.
and that you're a rock star. Yeah, just that this like a lot of like in the Pines, you have these long lines, and like, I mean, there's a lot of I don't know what I'm trying to say. Like ballads seem to have the 4-beat, 3-beat, 4-beat, 3-beat. And you do some of that, but it's like you're expanding it too. It's not just it is concentrated, but it's also expanded. You know what I mean?
Well, I like ballads, but I don't like to write them.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in writing story that way. It's a different thing from what I do. I do like the long line a lot. And most recently, I got it from the place of Rust. I like the way people can exist by the long line as actors or actors. They're on stage and they're reciting these lines. And it's taken. The long line is a very old truth-telling, dramatic and poetic device. And it's, it's truth-telling. But I've always enjoyed Dylan's line. It just sort of goes along. It has a little dance in it, and little turns of voice and tones of voice. And I like all that play more than I do the point.
You know, have a note, long form song, like that, like a lot of your poems are like long form songs, like there's like epic the singers like going these long lines. What do you think about that old division of like, I mean not division, but like Pound saying like mellow poia, logo poia, fano poia? Is there something else? What do you add to that? You know?
No, I never do that.
Yeah.
Like have to do 3 things,
Right.
8 things, and Kevlar to have it by number. And it helps. It sort of pretends that you know what you're talking about if you can remember it.
I was trying to find this quote I had about, there's something about, oh, the part when you talk about being in the room with others, like reading poetry by yourself out loud, like like Beowulf or something,
Yeah,
and feeling dead. But then being in a room with
Yes.
others and it coming alive.
yeah, it doesn't exist till the others do.
Yeah.
That's what I've noticed about Beowulf. It's not supposed to. And you have to have that electricity, and everything changes when there's an audience. And if you read it to yourself, you're just kind of patting yourself on the back or being annoyed by the fact that it's not good enough. But when there are people there, then you're in a state of communication. It's very important.
And then you also talk about how you edit your own work. A lot of this book is about your own process. So like you edit your own work by reading it out loud.
Yeah.
So that's a different kind of thing. That's not boring. Because
No, it's not boring. It's not boring. No, if I'm editing, it's not boring. But sometimes, like, you do that for years on end, and you do it every night, and it's kind of boring. And you would prefer to have an audience. I've been living in Paris for 30 years now. I've done a lot of writing without having a constant, frequent audience every time. I don't get to read very much. I save it for a lot for when I come over here. So the readings are very important to me. And I learn a lot from them.
Yeah,
I need to know what people like
and
and how they react and whether I am communicating with them. I'm very old fashioned with that poetry. I think it's an oral art. But I write difficult poetry and I write it for the page too, and all that is really hard to negotiate. But I want the part where I read it. I don't want the part where I talk it, talk about it so much.
but then you also have this very visual practice with the collages and the fans and writing. And how does that relate to the oral, do you think? Like you just like expanding to these different places, the poem expanding.
I'm relaxing.
Mm.
I'm relaxing and it's like coming out of my hand. I like to be thinking with my hands rather than with my head. I just get so sick of it.
So it's like a relief from
But
like
I'm still thinking because when I do it, I see the collages and I see the forms of doing things to each other, and it's not unlike what I do in the poems. How the forms relate to each other and what the images are, but it's coming out of my hands. It's great.
And I love the essays about disobedience, and just that quote: "It's necessary to maintain a state of disobedience against everything." I just love that. And you talked about how, if you're like just true to being disobedient, that's also an obedience. You have to subvert that and that duality. It actually reminded me of a tarot card. When you pull a tarot card, and it's like upside down, you have to figure out if you're going to flip it over. But it's always the other side too. Like this kind of you have to continually reinvent your disobedience.
Right. You do, because you never know what you're being obedient to. But actually, you're always being obedient to your friends. You have to disobey your friends. They don't necessarily have to know. You have to maintain your friendships. So.
I like your word non-compliance with what I always call it schools, but I think you also call it factions, like be factions within a certain school, or like just not deal with that stuff. Like just be your own singularity. Like only this poem could be written by me, you said earlier.
Well, that's what all poems are like that.
Yeah.
Any poem can only be written by the person who wrote it.
Right.
But that particular poem is one that I can say that about of my own for sure. I know that no one could have written it except for me. But when I teach workshops, and I see people's poems, I see how which style. I could tell whose poem it is after like a couple of classes. People are completely individual, and poets are too. There's all this electricity and his traits and everything just coming out of him and making him so very, very unique expression.
That's really great. That's one thing I was just to talk about. Your work is so singular, but it's also deeply intertextual, and like your Descent of a Let being like the myth of Inanna, or like this kind of call and response with older texts. But I was wondering if you could talk a little more about who are some of your great inspirations for prose stylists for doing this kind of work in this book.
Well, when I wrote Coming After, it was like I had written a number of essays before, but it was the first time I thought of it as like a certain kind of thing that I might be interested in the history of. Well, that's not true. I had always thought about it, but I wasn't doing it exactly. I was interested in the essays of Marianne Moore a lot. I hadn't read them before, and a volume of them was published in the 80s, and they were really good. And nobody talks about them. I was reading, and I had just come to Paris, and they had a lot of expat literature there, and I went through all the essays of James Baldwin. And I was thinking about him a lot because he knew how to write directly about a subject. And in the 90s, it didn't seem like anyone knew how to do that about poetry. And Baldwin could write about anything in a direct manner and very elegantly. And so I was thinking about him. And I was thinking that G.P. Chesky, Virginia Woolf, and those were the people I so they were the models.
What about Evan Bindi? With the dances?
There were quite enough of them, and I already had him in my system anyway, so I didn't have to think about it, because I already thought about him all the time without thinking.
What else do I want to ask? I know I wanted to ask you about the great sentence in the intro. How you talked about how there were no babies in writing when you first were writing, and like how you started writing about that, babies and pregnancy and the things that you were going through.
Where's
I'll
that?
find it.
There's no intro. Is there?
Oh, I mean the first part.
Oh,
Sorry.
that's about dreams.
Okay, dreams, babies. There's a part about babies.
There is probably. There is.
Alright.
Might be an instability.
Oh yeah, here it is. The poets of disobedience.
Ah,
Okay, here it is. There were no babies in poetry then. How could that have been? What are we leaving out now? Usually what's exactly in front of the eyes, ears, nose, and mouth, in front of the mind. But it seems as if one must disobey everyone else in order to see it all. So like what's happening right now in front of us. That was the thing that was getting ignored that you saw.
yeah, I
Yeah,
saw.
yeah.
Ted had babies in his post, but not from the point of view of being a mother. So anyway, he would the way he talked about babies was extremely amusing. He would say, Jacques, David is crying. He would mean his son.
I guess now I want to ask the question, what are we leaving out now? What do you think?
I don't know. Listen, I live alone. I'm a hermit, so I'm not sure. It's for you to find out, probably. It's for the younger generations to find out. It's been a tough time. What is it being seen? Because we're told too much about what we're seeing, and then we do these rectangles and these messages all the time. They're not what we're not seeing. They just robotize us through our mental processes. I think we that would be very disobedient. You threw away your phones. If we could have some kind of demonstration, the point of which was to burn our phones, not our bras, but our phones, that would be great. If we could just get them out of our lives.
I have to admit I'm very addicted to my little computer. But no, if I write poems on mine all the time, it's It's really great. You can write in bed like this.
I wrote the notebooks. I liked, because, again, I have that experience of having it come out of my body.
Mhm.
And I get to see my handwriting. My handwriting still looks pretty good. My hands aren't shaking yet, but I expect. I like my handwriting.
Do you have anything else you want to talk about?
I don't know.
You want to talk about needles? I can give you that.
Oh, yes.
Well, yeah, just go
What do you
random.
think?
I don't know. You want to talk about rocks?
Well, I have the quote, I've lived 3 places that have deeply affected me in my poetry, Needles, New York City, and Paris. And I agree, there's a great part you're talking about how you're always sort of in all those places at once. You didn't understand how somebody could write from all those places at the same time, but you did, and you realized you could, like, later.
It's a rock.
There's rocks.
It's a rock from Needles. This is a box of rocks from.
Just dancing.
That was the boxes from needles.
You found this in the bits.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Some of that stuff was from
That's
folk
funicular.
Yes, very good. And the shiny mic.
And shiny mica and a jewelry box. Yeah, because I worried about the fact that I was from so many different places, and most poets like stand for a certain kind of place that they're from, and I was unable to do that, and I knew it from the time that I was growing up, because when I changed from being from Needles to being living in New York, then everything was different, and I was a different self, because I was suddenly really digging anonymity, because it was the one thing you can't have in a small town. You can't be anonymous. And I was never anonymous in Needles, but suddenly I was in New York, and I was anonymous. It was delicious. It was really delicious, and I knew I loved it, but I knew I loved Needles. I loved the desert, and I was always going to have the both of them, so I was going to be contradictory. Then I moved to Paris, and I didn't know if I was admitting Paris into my consciousness or not, but I've been there for 30 years. So it must be there. And then I gradually, I seem to be taking it on, but not in a way that any of the other people I knew that went to Paris and took it on. And I've become some other kind of entity who lives there, but I don't know how to talk about it. I don't know how to talk to anyone about it. I love my neighborhood.
I like what you said about you'd like to come back here and read to us. Like, I love,
Yeah, I come back here and read to you. Well,
but you read a lot in Europe.
in Paris, I wake up and I go out and I go pick up the newspaper, and I see Monsieur Abdulli every day except for Sunday. He sells the newspaper, and we have a little chat. And it's an important part of my life to see him for just a few minutes each day. And I have these neighborhood friends, and they run stores. And they're
Your cafe.
and the cafe, the Corai, but it changes hands. But there are a lot of zany layers there right now.
Have you ever written a play? I forgot.
Yeah, I wrote a 3-act play that was put out in Obama.
Oh, what's it called?
Hands White Woman.
Oh, yeah.
It's a beautiful play. But Taylor Mead was in it.
Oh, yeah.
He played George Schneider.
We should put it on again.
It was put on again for one night at the conference event in Oakland. And it was really great. And Kevin Killian played Taylor Mead, playing George. It was beautiful.
We have time for one or two audience questions, if anybody has them.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Just continuing along the thread about how Paris may have affected your consciousness. I think one of the essays is about Doug Oliver writing about a salvo for Africa, and he was someone who I feel like one of the things that happened when you moved was there was this idea of you can't see the United States if you're in it. You sort of have to get out of it to see it abroad. And that was similar to why Doug couldn't be in England as a British writer. It was to sort of get this other international perspective.
Yes, that totally happened to me. I mean, it really happened to me. It was like, it was somewhat like, but
Was it intentional or?
no, I didn't think it was going to, I didn't know it was going to happen. I didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, I went there because Doug wanted to go there, and I was in love with him. I went to Paris because I was with my husband, basically. And then suddenly I had this major culture shock because I was in the United States of war. And then I started reading the newspaper every single day, a couple of times a day. I started seeing the United States in a different way. I opened up to international politics. Doug had been a journalist, and we had friends who were journalists, and we had this completely international consciousness. And I took it on. It was something I took on. And it's in this book. It's in this book.
When we were talking earlier and I was asking you about where you're getting your news sources, you said that Le Monde was one of the best
Yes, Le Monde
sources
is really good.
for contemporary news.
Yes. And I had forgotten to be catching up on it, but I checked in on it this morning. It was doing it, you know, it was just reporting things as they were happening every hour. Just the news. You could find out what was happening without having any slant to it. The vote is pretty good. I did the object, but at first in the morning I would do Harold Turkey, and when I first moved there, it was really good. And now it's just a piece of shit. It's the International New York Times, and it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. It costs $4.50 euros every day, and what you get is the editorial page of the New York Times, and which sensitizes me to the fact that everything I read is editorial. And that's what the news often is, and so why bother? But on the other hand, I love newspapers. I have loved them ever since I spent a summer with a job finding out about all the newspapers in all over this country, and their names and what they were reporting on. I learned all the names. Cleveland Plain Dealer and things like that. Philadelphia Inquirer. I didn't know about all these. I only knew about the Needles Desert Star. Times. Needles Desert Star is good.
Oh, wait, yeah, I got it. I brought you one.
McNeil resigns from board. I bet he did.
I kind of had a feeling you might want a local paper.
Yeah, my great grandmother used to subscribe to the Hysham, Montana Echo, and when I was little, her arms were just black with newsprint from reading her local paper. Like she hadn't been there in like 60 years.
So it comes out once a week,
So that was from a couple months ago.
but it's got all the obituaries in it.
Well, I highly recommend everybody get this book and radically open it bibliomantically, find your next place to read it. Like, just like.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Alex will be available to sign books. We have a new book, we have old books, and we're gonna have a stack of Psalm Cave books as well. Thank you, Alan, for being here.
Okay.